Ladies and gentlemen, today, I invite you to journey inward, to the place where noise fades and silence speaks. We often chase the world's loudest voices, believing that volume is synonymous with power. But true power lies elsewhere. It dwells in quiet spaces, in still waters, in silence. Silence is not emptiness. It is a field rich with meaning. It does not ask to be heard. It asks to be understood. And so, I offer you 5 insights, keynotes, that reveal the profound power hidden in silence. In the rush of modern life, we are constantly surrounded by voices, not only those of others, but also the noise of our own thoughts, our obligations, our endless distractions. We are conditioned to believe that to be heard is to be known, that to speak is to exist, and yet, the deeper truth is quite the opposite. It is not in speaking that we discover ourselves, it is in silence. When all external noise fades, when we allow ourselves to sit in stillness without the armor of activity or entertainment, something remarkable happens. The masks we wear each day, the role of the friend, the student, the professional, the performer, begin to slip away. Silence becomes the mirror in which the truest image of ourselves begins to take form. It is not always a flattering image. Sometimes what we see is discomforting, because silence does not flatter the ego, it reveals it. In silence, we are faced with our contradictions, the desires we suppress, the fears we deny, the wounds we carry, all rise gently to the surface when there is nowhere else to project them. This confrontation is not meant to shame us, but to awaken us. It is only by seeing ourselves clearly that we can begin the sacred task of integration, to unite the conscious and unconscious, to make peace with what we are and what we are becoming. There is a kind of inner dialogue that begins in the quiet. Not the endless chatter of the mind, but a deeper voice, one that is slow, ancient, and wise. This voice does not command, it suggests. It whispers rather than shouts. And to hear it, we must be willing to endure the initial discomfort of silence. We must be willing to resist the impulse to fill the void with sound, with scrolling, with talking, with doing. For many, silence feels like loneliness, but this loneliness is a gatekeeper, not a prison. Beyond it lies communion, not with others, but with the deepest aspects of our own psyche. In silence, we begin to recall forgotten dreams. Symbols and images float upward from the depths. We may not understand them at first, but we feel their weight, their truth. This is the language of the inner world, and it speaks clearest when the outer world is quiet. To truly know oneself is not a task completed by reading books or reciting affirmations. It is achieved in the courage to sit in silence, to observe what arises, and to not look away. The self does not need to be created. It is already there, waiting. Silence merely clears the fog so we can finally see it. So we must learn to welcome silence not as an absence, but as a presence, a sacred space where the self is revealed, not invented. And in that revelation, we begin the lifelong journey of becoming whole. In a world that demands constant explanation, analysis, and commentary, silence can feel foreign, unfamiliar, even threatening. But beyond the chatter of the intellect lies another mode of communication, one that does not rely on grammar or logic, and yet speaks with clarity and power. This is the language of the soul, and its native tongue is silence. We often confuse expression with sound, believing that what is not spoken is not understood. But some of the most profound truths we encounter in life cannot be spoken at all. They arrive in quiet moments, sitting alone beneath a sky at dusk, listening to the rustle of leaves, feeling an unexplainable emotion stir within us as we look into the eyes of another. In such moments, we do not figure things out, we know. This knowing is not of the mind but of the soul, and it speaks not in sentences, but in symbols, images, sensations. It is subtle, but unmistakable. Silence grants access to that realm of being where the soul resides. It removes the clutter, dissolves the distractions, and creates space where the inner voice, long drowned out by noise, can finally be heard. And yet, this voice does not shout. It does not persuade. It suggests, it beckons. The soul is patient, and silence is its sanctuary. There is a reason why sacred traditions across cultures have always honored silence as holy, not because it is empty, but because it is full. Full of mystery, full of presence. In silence, we come close to the timeless, the eternal. The soul does not dwell in the past or future, it lives fully in the present, and silence brings us into that present, stripping away the illusions of time and ego, and allowing us to simply be. What we discover in such stillness is often surprising. Insights arise not from analysis, but from intuition. A dream long forgotten may suddenly return with symbolic clarity. An unresolved question may soften into quiet understanding without needing a single word. These are not the products of rational thought, but of something deeper, an inner truth that only reveals itself when we have ceased to demand answers and have become willing to listen without expectation. In silence, the boundaries between the personal and the universal begin to dissolve. What we feel is no longer just our experience. It becomes archetypal, part of a greater pattern that unites all human beings. Joy, sorrow, fear, longing, these emotions, when met in silence, are no longer isolating. They become bridges. Through them, we connect not only to ourselves but to something greater, something eternal that moves through all of life. It is here, in this silent awareness, that we realize the soul is not something we possess. It is something we are. To speak the language of the soul, then, is not to say more, but to listen more deeply. To live with a sensitivity to what lies beneath words. To approach life not with answers, but with openness. Silence is the canvas upon which the soul paints. It is the soil in which the seeds of inner truth are planted. It is the breath between thoughts, the space between heartbeats, the doorway through which the eternal whispers to the temporary. And so, when you find yourself restless, uncertain, or overwhelmed by the clamor of the outer world, remember that your deepest wisdom is not found in the noise, but in the silence. Go there, sit in that quiet space, not to escape the world, but to return to it with clarity, centeredness, and a deeper understanding of who you truly are. For silence is not the absence of meaning, it is where meaning begins. Conflict is a natural part of human existence. Wherever there are people, there are differences, of thought, of emotion, of desire. Often, these differences collide, and the collision produces heat, anger, misunderstanding, resentment. In such moments, our instinct is to react. We raise our voices, defend our positions, and try to overpower the other with the force of our words. But while reaction is loud, it rarely leads to understanding. It hardens positions instead of softening them. It feeds the ego, but starves the soul, and in this way, conflict, if not transformed, becomes suffering. Yet there exists a different path, one that begins not with reply, but with silence. When we resist the urge to immediately react, when we create space between stimulus and response, something profound happens. Conflict begins to reveal its deeper nature. Silence, in these moments, becomes more than the absence of speech, it becomes the presence of insight. When we are silent in the face of conflict, we are not surrendering. We are observing. We allow ourselves to step back from the emotional fire and see what lies beneath it. We begin to notice what part of us has been triggered. Is it pride, fear, a long, buried wound? Often, the words we exchange during conflict are only surface waves. The real currents run deeper, and silence allows us to swim there. It invites reflection. Why does this matter so deeply to me? What need am I defending? What truth am I avoiding? Conflict always carries within it a message. Something wants to be seen. Something has been denied, misunderstood, or overlooked. But that message cannot be heard through shouting. It reveals itself only when we listen, not just to the other person, but to ourselves. Silence gives birth to this listening. It invites us into a sacred space where emotion can soften into understanding, where judgment can yield to curiosity. Moreover, silence disrupts the cycle of escalation. In any heated exchange, there comes a moment where one person's restraint can shift the entire energy of the conversation. To meet anger with calm, blame with quiet awareness is not weakness, it is strength. It takes far more courage to remain present and still in the face of provocation than it does to retaliate. And in that stillness, a transformation begins. The energy of conflict, when held rather than hurled, becomes fuel for insight. Over time, as we learn to trust this process, we come to see conflict not as a threat, but as a mirror. It reflects back to us what is unresolved within, and when we meet that reflection with silence, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of openness, we begin to grow. The ego wants to win, but the soul wants to learn. Silence aligns us with the latter. Eventually, we come to recognize a deeper truth. Wisdom is not born in certainty, but in tension. It arises from our willingness to sit with contradiction, with discomfort, with ambiguity. Silence allows us to do this. It holds space for multiple truths. It makes room for empathy, even when agreement is impossible. Thus, silence becomes the alchemy by which conflict is transformed. It does not erase pain, but it gives pain meaning. It does not deny difference, but it teaches us how to relate to difference without violence. And in doing so, it turns suffering into insight, and confrontation into connection. Conflict will always be a part of life. But whether it becomes a source of division or a path to deeper understanding depends on how we meet it. If we meet it with silence, not passive silence, but conscious, compassionate silence, then even the harshest encounters can become doorways to wisdom. There is a profound illusion that many of us carry, often without knowing it, the illusion of separateness. We move through the world encased in the boundaries of our individual identities, shaped by personal experiences, names, stories, opinions. It seems at first glance that we are isolated islands in a vast ocean, connected to others only by words, by action, by external interaction. But beneath this surface perception lies a deeper reality, one that reveals itself only in stillness. It is in silence, not in speech, that we begin to dissolve the illusion of separateness and touch something shared, something timeless and universal. Silence is the threshold where the personal meets the collective. When we enter it fully, we move beyond the noise of the ego, the part of us that constantly defines, compares, asserts, and we step into a space where the self becomes porous, where the boundaries begin to blur. We start to sense that our thoughts, our emotions, even our longings are not wholly unique. What we feel has been felt before. What we suffer, countless others have suffered. What we yearn for has echoed in the hearts of those long gone and those yet to come. In the quietude of silence, we begin to notice the subtle patterns that connect us. A memory arises, and with it an image, a mother's embrace, a child's laughter, the ache of loss, the thrill of beauty. And we realize that these are not only our memories, they are human memories. They are archetypal experiences that belong not just to the individual, but to the entire human story. In silence, we are not cut off from others. We are drawn into the vast web of shared being. This is why silence has long been the medium of the mystics, the sages, the seers. It is not simply an escape from the world. It is a return to the deeper, hidden world that underlies all existence. It is the place where we hear not only our own heartbeat, but the heartbeat of the world itself. And in hearing it, we begin to understand that we are not isolated selves walking separate paths, but unique expressions of one living whole. Silence also makes us more available to the suffering and beauty of others. In the absence of noise, our defenses drop. We become more receptive, more attuned. We feel more. When we witness someone else's grief or joy in silence, we are not trying to fix it or explain it. We are simply present with it. And in that presence, a quiet empathy arises, not based on words but on shared experience. This is not the sympathy of the mind. It is the communion of the soul. At times, silence even connects us to those we have never met. In nature, in art, in music, in sacred spaces, we feel a presence that transcends time. We stand before a mountain or a great painting or a star-filled sky and feel awe, not just as individuals but as humans. These moments remind us that something greater than us is always with us, surrounding us, moving through us. And it is often in silence that we become aware of it. Perhaps one of the most mysterious aspects of silence is its ability to dissolve the false boundary between self and other, inner and outer. We begin to sense that the collective is not out there. It is also within us. The struggles of the world echo in our own hearts. The peace we find within, however brief, radiates outward and contributes to something larger than ourselves. The transformation of the individual is never merely personal. It is also collective. So when we embrace silence, we do not become more alone. We become more connected. We become less entangled in our narrow identities and more rooted in our shared humanity. Silence reminds us that underneath all the differences of language, culture, belief, and background, there is a common thread, a deep, quiet current of life that runs through us all. And it is in that current, felt most clearly in moments of stillness, that we remember who we truly are, not isolated fragments, but parts of a greater whole. Not just individuals with personal histories, but voices in a vast chorus, notes in a timeless song. In silence, we return to that music. We hear it, we belong to it, and we are never alone. In the rhythm of life, we are often taught that movement is everything. We are urged to act, to decide, to speak, to move forward, always forward. In a world driven by urgency and speed, stillness can seem like stagnation, and silence can appear as inaction. Yet this view overlooks one of the deepest truths about the nature of effective action, that silence is not the opposite of action, it is its preparation. True action, the kind that emerges from clarity and purpose, is rarely born in haste. It arises from a depth that cannot be accessed in the noise and chaos of constant doing. Just as the earth must lie fallow before it can bear new crops, the human spirit requires periods of inner stillness to gather strength, vision, and alignment. Silence is that fallow ground. It is the sacred pause in which we remember why we act and what we are acting for. When we are silent, we listen, not just to others, but to the inner voice that so often gets drowned out by external noise. That voice, quiet and patient, does not rush to offer solutions. It offers insight. It weighs, reflects, considers. It does not care for speed, but for direction. And in that silence, we begin to notice things we had missed. The subtleties of a situation, the nuances of a problem, the deeper motivations behind our choices. Action that is rooted in such awareness becomes wise. It is no longer impulsive. It becomes intentional. Silence also gives us the space to let go of emotional turbulence that might otherwise cloud our judgment. Anger, fear, impatience, all of these can push us toward actions that are regrettable, reactions that are more about self-defense than genuine response. But when we sit with these emotions in silence, we do not suppress them. We allow them to settle. Like mud in water, they slowly sink, leaving the surface clear, and it is from that clear space that right action emerges. Moreover, silence is not a vacuum, it is a forge. It is where inner resolve is tempered. Think of the greatest decisions, the most courageous moments in human history. Rarely were they made in loud, hurried meetings. More often they were born in solitude, in moments of deep reflection, when a person faced the weight of consequence and listened to the call of something larger than their ego. In silence, the soul gathers the courage to act, not from pride, but from purpose. There is also a certain energy that builds in silence. It is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but like the gathering of clouds before a storm, or the coiling of a spring, something begins to take shape. Vision becomes focused, intention sharpens, doubt gives way to quiet confidence, and when the time comes to act, the action is not frantic or scattered. It is powerful, precise, and meaningful. It carries the momentum of everything that preceded it. In this way, silence becomes not a withdrawal from the world, but a deeper engagement with it. It prepares us not only to speak, but to speak what is necessary, not only to move, but to move with purpose. It allows us to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be driven. It brings us back to the source from which all meaningful action flows, the still center within. Even nature follows this pattern. The seed remains in darkness before it breaks into life. The night prepares the day. Winter readies the earth for spring. The same is true within us. Our inner seasons are not wasted time. They are essential phases of growth. Silence is the winter of the soul, when roots go deeper, even though nothing seems to move on the surface. But it is precisely this hidden depth that allows for strength when the time for action comes. So we must learn to trust the silence, to not rush out of it, but to dwell in it until it has done its work, For when we rise from silence, we do not rise as we were before. We rise with insight, with direction, and with a quiet force that needs no noise to prove its strength. And in that moment, our action becomes more than reaction. It becomes transformation.